Well, that was an excruciating hour and a half watching the vice presidential debate on CBS between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance.
You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants.
Letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children.
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do.
And I can't say that I had high hopes for this. As you know, if you've heard me talk about debates before, that I don't believe we should be doing them here in the United States. I think that they have become vehicles just to get ratings for television news networks and therefore profit, and that really it's a kind of profit-driven model. It has nothing to do with actual debates. It's not actually a debate at all. It's just two people making individual statements without the ability to kind of argue with each other. And, you know, a good argument is a good debate. And the level of political discourse I find in these things is base level, to say the very least. So I made the effort to watch this and live tweet, or live X, whatever it's called these days. I don't really do that, but on this occasion I was goaded. I was goaded to live tweet. So what I thought I'd do is, if you weren't following along, I'll just kind of read through what it was that I said, which might kind of jog our memories as to what actually happened. It was not the most exciting debate. It wasn't what I was looking forward to. I was looking forward to seeing Tim Walz not annihilate J.D. Vance, but to kind of leave as the clear winner. And sadly, that was not the case tonight. And I actually posted ahead of the debate, I'm not looking forward to tonight's pointless debate. I put mainly because Vance is a terrible person, and American TV political debates are always a circus. I then said that the pre-show analysis on CBS was all over the place, and it was. Just hearing, I don't know whether maybe these journalists were too young, but there wasn't any gravitas in the kind of pre-show analysis. It was all very base level, and I learned a new phrase. One of the female hosts said that they'd brought it back from the breach. I think they meant brink, but this is the point that I'm making, is that, you know, there wasn't even a sense that they knew that was incorrect. Anyway, that's maybe just me being pedantic. Yeah, I just got the feeling that really they didn't seem to care. TV news is reporting on a parallel America where everything is fine, where there isn't a threat to our democracy, where there isn't a threat of despotism. And I really got a sense that the hosts were just preparing for a Truman Show style debate that didn't exist in the real world. It was just so anodyne and weird. And I hashtagged sane washing. And that's a word you're going to hear quite a lot tonight. Tim Walz, I felt, had some media training. He came on in a way that I've never really seen Tim Walz behave. He's always been that kind of uncle coach character who's a little misshapen and unshaven and just a little erratic and authentic and joyful. And instead he was groomed, and it was all a little too over-prepared. And this is a problem that we have with TV debate shows, is that, you know, if you've got a candidate that is charismatic and intelligent, you do not need to prep them as much as people who don't possess any skills. And so I felt that he was over-prepped. And of course, J.D. Vance at the top, he didn't answer the first question. He instead, you know, took hold of that question and said, well, before I answer that, I want to talk about my fake childhood. And he kept referencing this poverty that he grew up in, and it was a whole word salad. They were asked a question about Iran initially, and somehow he made that about his own childhood. So there we are. You know, this is a bit of a theme in this debate, is that word salads, just a whole lot of words and not a lot of substance. I felt that Tim Walz took a while to warm up. He had to go first. It's very hard when you do that. And I get the sense that J.D. Vance pretends to be a politician. In real life, he's a venture capitalist. His knowledge of world events is pretty empty. They're talking about Iran like it's Kamala Harris's fault. Donald Trump destabilized the Middle East. Now, because it takes 2 or 3 years for these things to have an effect, we are seeing the effects of Donald Trump's mismanagement of the region. Then they asked about climate change, and of course, J.D. Vance doesn't believe in it. You might as well ask him to sing the alphabet song. He and his boyfriend Donald Trump, they think it's a hoax. He's denying that carbon emissions cause climate change. The argument is flawed. He has no ideas on that subject, and I just wrote, we're doomed. I did wish that Tim Walz interrupted J.D. Vance. They didn't mute the mics. It wasn't that kind of a setup. He could have interrupted him. He could have held court. He could have done that thing that I've suggested before where you go, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's all you have to say. That's a lie. And it makes the point. But he didn't. He allowed these lies and this propaganda and this crapola to be repeated ad infinitum. And I was so bored at this point. I was actually more interested in the health of the moderators. One of them kept coughing. And I posted, why do we need 2 moderators anyway? It's so weird. In the UK, we would never have 2 moderators doing a debate. You can't get any flow when there's 2 moderators. And I also questioned whether fuchsia as a choice of clothing was the right choice when the set was red and blue. It was a slight clash. I noticed that J.D. Vance was also wearing a fuchsia tie. But the debate was staccato. It wasn't smooth. It didn't flow. It wasn't an enjoyable watch. And I doubt that there'll be decent ratings for this debate either. I could imagine or even hear people switching over to CSI Miami. That was the point. I went and got some snacks. And none of Vance's stats on immigration were true. They were all fake. And Walz should have known to shut them down. But he didn't. And the reality is that Donald Trump did not have the best border in history. He just didn't. But Tim Walz should have known that and should have just butted in, but he didn't. I did write and mention that the eyeliner that J.D. Vance is wearing is actually natural. I did do some research on that. Some people have it. It's not painted on. It's just a natural human phenomenon. But I also noted that J.D. Vance had the edge at this halfway point on the debate. Despite his lies, he seemed to be more fluent. And where Tim Walz should have been responding to the lies instead of building new narratives. Because then it's too much information for people to take on. If he says something that is a lie, you say what you said was a lie, explain why it's a lie. Don't kind of ignore it and then build a whole new storyline. It's too much data. And there was that moment when J.D. Vance started mansplaining with, interruptions about Haitian migrants. It was very awkward. They did cut the mics in the end, but instead of just cutting them and moving on, they cut them and then they waited and you heard like hissing and it was excruciating. I really wanted to hear Tim cut JD down to size. There are too many stats, too many numbers. It should have been more about the threat to democracy because that's the biggest issue at hand. Talking more about the GOP, the Senate blockade on legislation, focusing on the lies, especially about tax cuts because Trump never gave tax cuts to regular people, only gave tax cuts to billionaires, and that's his plan again, and we never seem to hear that from the mouths of Democrats. And Vance started gaslighting. There was a theme of gaslighting, but Walz was falling into the trap, which is not good for Democrats. And I fear that Tim Walz has been tamed by media advisors. I want that guy back who gave the speech at the DNC. You remember him? He was great. This is a whole new Tim Walz. And then there was a question about Tim Walz misspeaking about Hong Kong and China and where he was when he should have been somewhere else. It didn't make any sense. It was painful. I actually bit off some of my hand at that point. And I posted, I really hope this debate gets better. Still no mention of the dangerousness of Donald Trump, no mention of dictatorship, no mention of the loss of democracy, just allowing Vance to take the reins and run with it. Walz needed also to stop saying that he agreed with Vance all the time. He said it about 4 or 5 times come the halfway point, and it's not a good look. You don't want to agree with someone like J.D. Vance. There is no common ground. There might be common ground in the debate, but in the politics of it all, there is no common ground. And that I felt was frustrating, to say the very least. The candidates were going for speed over substance. I wanted them just to slow it all down. I wanted Tim Walz to put some pauses in there, pregnant pauses, just to kind of take the control, take people's attention back, to hear, take control of the narrative. But he didn't. Then there was the gun violence conversation, and again, I was worried that Tim Walz failed to win the debate against J.D. Vance. And I wrote, if Walz can't win the debate on gun violence, then we have a big problem. I said it's as if Walz has been advised not to fight. And this is a bit of a theme with Democrats. They come to a knife fight armed only with spoons. I wish there was more at stake for them. The debate was a perfect example of sane washing, talking about America like it's not on the brink of a dictatorship or on the breach of a dictatorship. Vance was a bit of a Trojan horse. He made the GOP appear as moderate, and Walz wasn't exposing them for who they really are. And I also wish that Tim Walz would stop talking so much about Minnesota and take on the role of a national leader. This is an audition to be the vice president of the United States. It's not about being the governor of your state anymore. And I wanted to see him rise to that occasion, but he kept referencing Minnesota all the time. Now, I know that's his area of expertise, but this is an audition for the big job, or the second job. And it would have been great to have heard more of that positivity about how well the United States is doing right now. There was lots of doom and gloom when statistically we're actually doing far better than most other nations post-COVID. Growth is up, employment is up, stock market is up, inflation is down. And that positive energy that we got at the DNC, I would have liked to have seen and heard more of that from Tim Walz. We have to remember J.D. Vance is a fraud, and Tim Walz is the real deal. And tonight was an example of how the limitations and the pressure of the television format can change people unrecognizably. To me, Walz was a bag of nerves because, like Joe Biden, the format doesn't suit him. Whereas Vance, like Trump, thrives on television. It's not a natural environment. It's not normal to stand in this shiny TV studio where everything is illuminated and focus your speech into, a solitary camera. It's just not normal. And people like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, they're not real people. They're fake. They're made for TV, and so they will look good in that environment. And people like Joe Biden and Tim Walz, they are real people with real emotions and feelings and reactions, and so they will therefore have insecurities, and they will behave differently under that kind of pressure. And we saw that tonight. I also wanted to point out that the CBS News questioning was really oddly posed. They attempted to kind of both sides these parties when they're anything but equal. The moderators weren't moderating, they were just reading sanitized questions from a script. And they were sane-washing Trump quotes. It was very painful to watch. And then by the end, I was like, I don't think anyone's watching anymore. Vance is an extremely dangerous, radical, far-right operative. And yet tonight he was presenting as a moderate. And Tim Walz is a much more authentic and charismatic person in real life than the format allowed for. And Vance never answers the actual question, and Walz doesn't finish a thought. And the debate, to me, should have been all about Donald Trump's disastrous legacy and his future threat to democracy. And instead we had a bromance between VP picks who were being way too nice to each other. Call out the hate, call out the lies, call out the abuse. Just kept saying, yes, we agree on that. We agree. They don't agree. Not in the real world. Vance was much more agile than Tim Walz in this debate. Walz was showing his naivety as a rookie media player. Remember, it's only been a few months that he's, been in the spotlight. Walz is obviously a better, smarter candidate, but tonight, sadly, he took second place in TV debate land to the slimy J.D. Vance. Fortunately, it's not real life, and I don't think that this debate will have any effect on the vote. You're not voting for a vice president, you're voting for a president, and if you ever needed a reason to vote Kamala Harris, it's because she's not Donald Trump. And finally, I would say, who put Tim Walz in this fancy new suit? I preferred him in his own clothes. I could feel his discomfort. But his closing statement was his best moment. It was just missing all that coach personality that we got used to outside the TV studio. J.D. Vance is just a fake. And Margaret Brennan was coughing throughout, and I wish her better because I know what it's like. She was probably so sick she probably shouldn't have done the show, but she was like, there is no way I'm not doing a vice presidential debate. It's very good for my resume. So hopefully she gets some rest. So there we go. Just some thoughts. As you know, I used to work in TV debates, training politicians and speech writing and doing, media coaching and this type of stuff for these people in these studios. And so I know this environment, and I recognize, and I keep reminding you, it's not a natural place for people like Tim Walz to be. And that is why the Trumps and the Vances of this world, they can peacock in these environments, and the rest of us would probably just fall apart. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.